My Life as a Rat by Joyce Carol Oates. So rat is also in English. The word means to tell on somebody. And it's about a girl who grows up in a very violent family. The descriptions of the violence are a bit disturbing, and I find that the language is very communicative. You feel like you're really there. And she describes family situation, violent family situation, and how actually violence begins at home, which I totally agree to. And the description, the language here is it's very easy to read it, but it's very hard. I had to stop many times because the violence is too much. Since I live in a violent situation now, in the Middle East, it helps me confront my values. And I want to read a little bit from Accident. Okay. In November 1991, when Adrian Johnson was beaten unconscious and left to die on the shoulder of Delahunt Road, and the lawyer who defended Jeremy Jr. and Lionel Kerrigan at the time of Liza Deaver pleaded their case to prosecutors. The defense of boys will be boys didn't work so well for them, or for my cousin Walt Lemire, and a neighborhood friend named Don Berghaus was also involved in the beating. At this time, Jeremy Jr. was 19 and no longer living at home. He'd managed to graduate from South Niagara High with a vocational arts major, and through Daddy's intervention, was an apprentice plumber with a contractor for whom Daddy was also worked. The largest and best-known plumbing contractor in the city. He had not yet been accepted into the plumbers union, but there was no doubt that he would be as soon as he completed his probationary period. No African American belonged to the local plumbers union. This would be emphasized unfairly, some thought, in the media coverage of the case, unfairly because there were no African Americans in the local police officers union, in the firefighters union, the electricians, and the carpenters union amongst them. The only local union which black men were welcomed was the sanitation workers union, which was predominantly black and Latino. Lionel was 16, a sophomore at the high school, big for his age, coarse-skinned, easily bored. Even in vocational arts, Lionel's grades were poor. He cut classes when our mother didn't dare report him to our father in fear of a terrible scene. But Lionel was in awe of his independent older brother, who lived by himself now in a place near the railroad yard and owned a car. Daddy's old 1984 Chevrolet. He passed on to Jer, since it was old but worthless as a trade-in. Weekends, the two hung out together, drinking beer with Jer's friends, cruising in Jer's car. Jer had hated school, but now he was hating full-time employment even more. Being overseen, assessed, and judged. Worse, he hated being a plumber's assistant, actually having to clear toilet of shit, every kind of crap. Came close to puking every time he went out. What their father called fucking real life, didn't know how the hell long he would take this fucking real life. At home, Jer had grown sick of Mom snooping into his life, overhearing him on the phone, giving him unwanted advice, stripping his bed of soiled sheets, picking up his felt stiffened socks and underwear from the floor to be laundered, preparing food he was bored with, he'd grown out of eating years ago, had come to hate. Fast food restaurants were good enough for him. Greasy cheeseburgers, heavily salted French fries, anything that came in a cellophane wrapper strung up in colorful display at the 7-Eleven. He'd tear open with his teeth in a pretense of rapacity. When he'd broken up with his girlfriend, boasting how he'd left her stranded at a tavern, exactly what the bitch deserved for disrespecting him, there was Mom shocked and demanding to know why he'd do such a thing. She had met Abby, and Abby seemed like a nice girl, and Jared came back at her. Fuck Abby is a nice girl. You don't know about Abby. Mom, so mind your own fucking business. There is no nice girls, just different kinds of pigs. Mom was so shocked by Jared speaking to her in such a way, not just the disrespect, the insolence, but also the meaning of his words, the loathing for her. She could not reply, but stumbled away to another room. No nice girls, but different kinds of pigs. Again and again, why? But it was like nice girls, pigs. There was no why. You would say the Kerrigan boys had not been brought up that way, and that would be true. And yet, going back to a time when our father had attended South Niagara High, there'd been incidents involving white boys and dark-skinned boys, especially following Friday night sports events. But these were usually squabbles or altercations between sport teams, rival schools, rivalry with Niagara Fall High, Tonawanda High, South Buffalo. Some of these teams were predominantly white and others were predominantly black. South Niagara had integrated teams that coaches liked to boast. Boys teams, girls teams, football, basketball, softball, swim team. Cheerleaders, that was another story. No incident had involved Hadrian Johnson, who was on both the Veracity basketball and softball teams in his junior high. The previous year, when Jeremy Kerrigan had been a senior, he'd known Hadrian Johnson slightly, as he'd known a scattering of African American boys at the school, but there'd been no animosity between them, none at all. So Jeremy Jr. insisted, and so it seemed to be true. Lionel would deny animosity too. Any race prejudice, not him. They would insist they admired black athletes, Mike Tyson, Magic Johnson, Michael Jordan, Jerry Rice, Barry Sanders, and many others. They'd been aware of Hadrian Johnson on the high school sports teams, for who had not been aware of Hadrian Johnson. Not that Hadrian was a brilliant player. Usually he was just very good, very reliable, the kind coach can depend upon. Yes, it was true. The better black athletes at South Niagara Falls, generally showy, spectacular. They modeled themselves after the great national black athletes whom Americans watched avidly on TV. These were the insolent blacks whom white boys feared, disliked, envied. If these black athletes were not demonstratively superior to the best white players, they were likely not to be chosen for Veracity teams. For them was much more pressure from the white fathers that their sons be chosen for teams. And there was, as coaches tried to explain, limited space on the team. But granted the fact, in the face of such competition, still Hadrian Johnson was chosen for 2 Veracity teams, a favorite coaches and of teammates. A black kid, yes, but not, one of them. South Niagara wasn't a large school. Fewer than 500 students distributed among 3 grades. In some way, everyone knew everyone. But white students and dark-skinned students didn't mix much. On sport teams and in the school band and chorus, service clubs, but not socially, nor was there mixed dating. Just about never. It was ironic. Hadrian Johnson had been an outstanding player on the South Niagara JC boys softball team, which was comprised of boys from several city schools. Photographs of Hadrian and his JC uniforms to be published in the newspapers and on TV had been taken at Kerrigan Field. Questioned by South Niagara prosecutors whether they'd had any specific reason to stalk and harass Adrian Johnson, the boys insisted no. They had not stalked him. That was wrong. They'd meant just to scare him, and they had not known it was him. They hadn't seen his face, not at first. But had they forced Adrian Johnson off the road because he was black? Vehemently, they denied this. Repeatedly, they denied this. 4 white boys driving a vehicle, a solitary black boy on a bicycle, late Saturday night, but no, they were not racists. It would be bitterly debated whether the attack had been a hate crime or an assault that had gotten out of control, in which race wasn't an issue. If a hate crime, the assailants were likely to be sentenced to longer prison sentences if they were found guilty. But there was the possibility, if they insisted upon a jury trial, that they might be acquitted by a sympathetic white jury. If he could devise a way in which such a defense would not backfire and make things worse in the media, for instance, their lawyer was considering the boys might claim self-defense. The boys had been drinking for most of the evening. 2 of them were underage, which involved the others for having supplied them with alcohol. The 7-Eleven storekeeper who sold them the 6-packs was in trouble as well. They'd been driving around at the mall, returned from the mall, drinking and tossing beer cans, stopped at Fridays where there was a crowded bar scene, later at Christo's, which was taking a chance. Our fathers sometimes dropped by Christo's on Friday night, past Kerrigan Field, past Patriot Park, Kirkland Avenue, DePaut Avenue Street, Delahunt. Saw this guy in a hood riding on a bicycle on Delahunt, looking kind of suspicious to us, like he didn't belong in the neighborhood. Something in the bicycle basket looked like could be stolen goods. We did not see his face. We did not know who it was. If they'd shouted after him, it was just a way of talking, scaring someone who maybe didn't belong in the place he was in. If Jer aimed the car at the bicyclist, it was just to scare him, not to run him down at the side of the road. And the way he tried to escape, crawling away, yelling to leave him alone, like what a guilty person would do. Like cops they were, neighborhood vigilantes, keeping strangers from breaking into houses, stealing cars. Their lawyers were suggesting this possibility, vigilantes, fighting crime, like the possibility of self-defense. Problem was the boys weren't in their own neighborhood. Adrian Johnson happened to be in his neighborhood, yes, but they hadn't known, like they hadn't gotten a good look at the victim's face until later. Delahunt was a darkened road at this time of night. Strip mall, fast food, taco place, gas station, 7th Street. There was a small trailer court with a string of unit lights from previous Christmas. Beyond that, a potholed street of small wood frame bungalows, lacking sidewalk, called Howard. Following the bicyclist along Delahunt for the hell of it. Well, who rides a bicycle at night? Looked like a tall dude, not a kid, not a young kid. But what was in the basket? Reflectors on the road, on the back of the bike, and the bike looked. They could see, squinting in the headlights, that they might be pretty expensive. Stolen merchandise? The bicyclist was acting guilty, they thought, bumping along on the shoulder of the road, knew they were there, and coming close to him. Maybe he thought they were cops, so he tried to pedal fast as he could, intending to turn into a dirt lane, opening ahead in a field, looking to escape, but for whoever was in the car was coming close to him, honking his horn like machine gun fire, guys yelling out the windows. It would turn out that Adrian Johnson had spent the evening at his grandmother's house on Amsterdam Street, a mile away. Sometimes when Adrian spent time with his grandmother, who suffered from diabetes, he stayed the night. But this night, He did not. Bicycling home to Howard Street along a stretch of Delahunt where if there was traffic it was likely to be fast, but there was relatively little traffic at that hour of the night. He'd been 10 minutes from his mother's house when a vehicle had come up swiftly behind him, swamping him with its bright lights, deafening horn, derisive shouts, curses, cut off the front right fender, striking the bicycle, a high-pitched scream, the fallen boy amid the twisted bicycle, trying to free himself and crawl away. What happened next was confused. Hard to remember, like something smashed and broken, you are trying to reassemble. Still, it was an accident, the boys would claim. Had to be, for what happened hadn't been premeditated. Striking the bicyclist could see by this time that he was a kid, maybe a black kid, but still yet no one they recognized. So Jer braked the car to a stop, had to check the bicyclist to see if he was all right. True, Jer did stop the car. True, they did exit the car. True, they did approach the injured boy who was trying to crawl away from them at the side of the road. Was it true all four boys had exited the Chevrolet, or had Walt remained inside as Walt would never cease playing? Here is a fact. Nothing of what happened was what Jeremy Lionel Walt's son had meant to happen. What wasn't to say that they remembered clearly what had happened, just that they had been drinking. The older guys had gotten the beer for the younger guys Saturday night, deserving more from fucking Saturday night, not ready to go fucking home just yet. But only seconds. They'd stopped on Delahunt. Not even a minute. They were sure, vaguely aware of the traffic on the road, a vehicle passing, someone slowing to call out the window. What's going on? And Jerry yelling back, "We called 911, it's okay." And then panicked and back in the Chevrolet, driving away with squealing tires like a TV cop show. And even then, they would afterwards claim that scarcely been aware that the badly injured bicyclist was dark-skinned, still less his identity, 17-year-old Adrian Johnson from their own school. Shortly after midnight on November 2nd, 1991, an anonymous call was placed to 911 reporting a badly beaten young man lying unconscious and unresponsive at the side of Delahunt Road, South Niagara. A bicycle twisted beside him. An emergency medical team from South Niagara General Hospital was immediately dispatched, and the stricken young man brought back by ambulance, still unconscious and unresponsive, to the ER. The victim would never regain consciousness but would die of severe brain damage and other traumatic injuries 9 days later. No other calls to 911 had been reported that night, but the following morning, when news of the beating began to spread through South Niagara, an anonymous caller reported to police that he'd been driving on Delahunt Road the night before around 11:40 p.m. and he'd seen a vehicle parked at the side of the road where someone, it appeared a young black man, was lying on the ground bleeding from the head wound as 4 or 5 young white guys stood around him. It had looked, the caller said, as if there'd been a fight. It slowed his pickup, then accelerated when the white guys saw him, for they were looking threatening, drunk and scared. And he thought he saw one of them with a rifle. Maybe not a rifle, a tie iron, a baseball bat. He'd gotten out of there fast, hoping to hell they wouldn't get in the car and follow him. The caller went on to identify the car as a mid-1980s model Chevy, dull bronze, pretty battered, rusted, and dented. Especially, you could see that the front right fender was bent all in front of where they'd hit the kid. You couldn't miss that. You hadn't gotten a good look at the boys, just white kids, maybe high school age, a little older. But he tried to memorize the license plate number, first 3 digits, KR4, something like that.